Professor Tamar Aryab is the president of Beit Berl College in Israel and the chair of the Council of President of 23 colleges in education in Israel. She served as a member of the Council of Higher Education for 2 terms and was appointed by the Council to lead a major reform in the Israeli teacher education system in 2006. Professor Aryab's areas of research and teaching are curriculum, instruction, and evaluations, as well as teacher policy. Today, her topic is the education of teachers, characteristics and challenges. Professor Aryab, please take the stage.
Thank you, Avital. Good morning to everybody. The preparation of professionals has its unique characteristics and challenges in every profession. However, it is my suggestion and opinion the education of teachers faces extremely difficult challenges that I would like to make the point today and explain why I think it is. And I just talked to Professor Levy and I said that I think it's much more difficult to prepare teachers than to prepare doctors. So I think that overcoming the challenges that the teacher education profession encounters is the key, really, to a long-term and overarching kind of effective teacher policy. I would like to present briefly 5 major challenges that together, I'll come back to the slide that I'll show now, and I'll come back to that slide in the end. And I think that if we take into consideration all 5 challenges together as one package, we might overcome some of the difficulties and challenges that we're encountering now. The first challenge is the teacher education faces unrealistic social demands and expectations. The second is the teacher education is a profession in transition, and teacher education will be more important in the years ahead because teaching is going to be a booming profession. Challenge 3 is that the problematic state of teacher education reflects the dilemmas and characteristics of the teaching profession. That's a major point that I'll make through my presentation, that you cannot basically deal with teacher education unless you make some major changes in the teacher profession itself. Challenge 4 is that there are many things that we know about teacher education, but lots of things that we still don't know. And finally, what needs to be done to build a high-performing profession. We have many lessons from around the world about what works and what needs to be done, but it is really very hard and difficult to implement. And at the final part of my presentation, I'll dare to suggest some programmatic ideas for the Ministry of Education in Israel, borrowing from the international perspective. Just 2 weeks ago, the National Council on Teacher Quality published its teacher preparation review for the year 2013. In this report, there are 1,130 teacher education programs in academic institutions in the United States that have been graded on a four-star scale, like the restaurants, 3-star, 3.5 stars, 2 stars. But the grading itself is not so important as much as the controversy and the dispute that went on the web around it. And I think that this controversy reflects the ambiguity about what makes teacher education a good program, what are the characteristics of a good teacher education program, and what is good teaching in general. And coming back to the medical profession, I think that the Flexner report from 1910 that basically transformed the preparation of the medical profession into some kind of a standardized academic profession and became a global standard is something that we're missing in teacher education. We have no such acceptable global standard. So what I will do now is that I'll go through the challenges, each challenge at a time, and briefly explain why this challenge is making teacher education really, really very difficult job right now. So the first challenge is the unrealistic expectations from teacher education. The education of teachers is a path into a profession that is expected to make children learn in an ever-arching and complex context and is expected to address many of the illnesses of society. So every profession has a path into the profession. That's some kind of a preparation program that leads to some kind of a certification or licensing. There is also a guild, a union, a group of people. So that's not specific to a teacher education. It is expected to make children learn in an ever-changing and complex context. Well, obviously, other professions also need to change themselves all the time based on developing research and other parameters. In teacher education, it's mostly because teaching has to encounter globalization, increasing diversity, multiculturalism, and other unique parameters to teaching. But the last part of this sentence is what makes teacher education extremely, extremely difficult. Okay? It is expected to address many of the illnesses of society. Illnesses such as social inequalities, unemployment, decline of social values, crime. These things are unique to teacher education. They might be maybe in social work or some other professions, but I think that the combination of all these things and expectations, high expectations from teaching, is also expressed in the name of this, the title of this conference. What does it mean, changing reality through education? Would we say changing reality through nursing, changing reality through medicine? I have never heard about a term like that. So even the title of this conference reflects this big, big social demands and expectations that we have from teacher education. A teacher needs to be a social worker, law enforcer, counselor, manager, psychologist, and finally gets to teach. He has to care, mentor, stimulate, provoke, engage, love, communicate, and facilitate learning. So these multiple facets of teaching are really extremely challenging. And I would like to share with you a small segment by Ken Robinson from TED 2013 that talks about that. So bear with me for a minute. It worked a minute ago. It's uploading slow. Okay, I'll start. I hope it works.
One of the effects of the current culture here, if I can say so, has been to deprofessionalize teachers. There is no system in the world or any school in the country that's better than its teachers. Teachers are the lifeblood of the success of schools. But teaching is a creative profession. Teaching properly conceived is not a delivery system. You know, you're not there just to pass on received information. Great teachers do that. But what great teachers also do is mentor, stimulate, provoke, engage. You see, in the end, education is about learning. If there's no learning going on, there's no education going on. And people can spend an awful lot of time discussing education without ever discussing learning. The whole point of education is to get people to learn. The role of a teacher is to facilitate learning. That's it. And part of the problem is, I think, that the culture of the dominant culture of education has come to focus on not teaching and learning, but testing. Now, testing is important. Standardized tests have a place. But they should not be the dominant culture of education. They should be diagnostic. They should help. But all that should support learning. It shouldn't obstruct it, which of course it often does. So in place of curiosity, what we have is a culture of compliance. Our children and teachers are encouraged to follow kind of routine algorithms rather than to excite that power of imagination and curiosity.
אוקיי, זה בעצם הצ'אלנג' הראשון, first challenge, that the complexity demand, the social demands of teaching. I would like to move to the second challenge, saying that teaching is basically profession in transition, and I would like to show why teaching is in transition and then to indicate what are the implications for teacher education, because if the profession is in transition, then the preparation for the profession is in transition as well. So I'll show 5 major reasons for the transition and the implications for teacher education. So the first reason for the transition is that there is a decline of the social educational agencies in societies such as the family, or what we call the church in general as a concept, and there is a growing diversity of student population. The implication for teacher education is that there is a growing expectation from teachers to meet all student needs, focus on individual learners and their specific needs, in addition to the group and community of learners. And we have to prepare teachers to assume social responsibilities and social justice. That's a heavy job. The impact of technology is another reason why the profession is in transition. So in teacher education, we have to teach our student teachers to use technology pedagogically, adapt instruction accordingly in classroom management, and find new ways of communicating with youngsters. Another reason for the professional transition is the global competition for student achievements and the economy-driven needs for skilled participants in the job market, and in that sense, the factory model of schooling, which has been so dominant in the last decade. So the implications for teacher education is that programs of teacher education are going constantly under quality assurance processes and are being tested for accountability for their own achievements. Another reason is the worldwide shortage of teachers. So the implication is that we see multiple entry paths into teaching, including accelerated programs, non-programs, questioning traditional programs, etc. We find new incoming groups, people who didn't used to come to teacher education in the past and are moving into this profession now. And there is also a growing understanding of the importance of induction and continuous professional development. And finally, there is this ever-changing education policies that the governments are changing all the time. For example, No Child Left Behind, which we had in Israel too after the Dovrat Commission, the Race to the Top, the Common Core Study standards, inclusion, etc. So every time there is a new reform by the government, we have to revise and reform teacher education. So in a way, as a teaching profession is changing, we have constantly to change teacher education as well. So basically, teaching is going to be a booming profession because we need more teachers and better teachers. And teacher education will become more crucial than it used to be. And a teacher education will need to adapt itself constantly, quickly to all the new challenges. The third challenge that I talked about before was the dilemmas of teaching that project on teacher education. And I would like to briefly describe 10 dimensions. I'll present them in a dichotomy. And I know it's not black-white, left-right, but just for making the point, I present them on this sequence of one thing versus the other. The ideological mission, is teachers supposed to change the social order? If so, teacher education has to be subversive, chatrani, versus teachers that have to be compliant, to reproduce what's going on in society, and then teacher education has to keep the current status quo and teach for conformity. The focus, child versus teacher school curriculum. If teaching is child-oriented, then teacher education has to be process-oriented, progressive and democratic. If it's more toward the system and the school, then we are dealing more with the products, dealing more with the content and the organizational perspective. Image is another dimension. is being a teacher mainly something which is in mindset and dispositions, and then we have to work in teacher education on values, attitudes, beliefs, or is it more about knowledge and skills, and then we have to work on the know-how? The infrastructure. Some people say you are born to be a teacher, so maybe you can go into teaching without going through any teacher education program. Some say it doesn't matter whether you have it or not as a teacher, there are best practices that you have to learn. The context is also an important dimension. Teachers have to serve national and local needs. Okay, for example, in Israel, they have to prepare students for the Meitzav, which is the local test. But they also have to, I would say, adapt themselves to the global trends, like PISA, TEAMS, PEARLS, all the external Olympic educational testing. I can tell you from my own experience that I taught in 3 different countries. I taught in Israel, United States, and in Germany. And teaching is not the same in every country. There are some commonalities, but there are also lots of contextual differences. I don't know if that's true in medicine too. And then the measuring impact. How do you measure the impact of a teacher? Some say it's very complex to measure. Others say, well, you just, measure the added value and you pay teachers accordingly. I would like to share with you briefly 2 findings from a study done by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in 2009. One is on how to measure teachers' performance, and you can see that the blue color, so that it's a very accurate parameter to measure teacher performance. So all the things that have big blue percentages are very, very difficult to measure. For example, student engagement, okay, a peer observation, self-evaluation, okay, so the things that really count in terms of a teacher's impact are hard to measure. On the other hand, if you look at the bottom, student grades on standardized tests, that's the last item, it's very easy to measure, but it doesn't say anything about the teacher's performance measure, at least according to this study. And also, if you look at views on compensation, okay, compensation doesn't seem to improve either student achievements, that's what you see on the left side, or retain good teachers in education, and that's what you see on the right side. You don't have to copy it, you'll be able to scan my presentation at the end through a QR, so don't bother. I see many people trying to take photos of the presentation. I go back to some other dimensions that are problematic in teaching and reflect on teacher education. As I said, teaching is in transition from content to learning skills, innovative, creativity, entrepreneurship. Tell you the truth, I'm a teacher educator. I'm not sure that I know how to prepare teachers to be creative, to be innovative. I really don't know. And I haven't seen good research base that can instruct me about how to do that. Social necessity. Teaching is a highly needed profession but poorly paid and esteemed. The same with teacher education. It's necessary. You will see later on 2 ministers of education what they say about teacher education, but the budget and the esteem is low. Career path. There are multiple points of entry, too many entry points into a profession. There is a limited career path for teachers and no universal consensus or enforced legislation about who is qualified to teach. So this makes it very different because we don't have a compass in teacher education about what's the right path and where do we have to lead towards. And finally, the demography. It's a profession that is highly feminine, large scale and unionized, and it's extremely difficult to make changes in such big bodies, I would say conservative bodies of workers. So therefore, teacher education looks different across and within countries, is under constant critique and bashing, and is continuously reformed. Boy, that's a big, big challenge. So that's the end of the 3rd challenge, in which I wanted to show the interconnection between the status of teaching and the status of teacher education. And I move into the 4th challenge, things that we don't know and don't know about teacher education. Until this point, I talked mostly about external things, things which are coming from the outside into teacher education. And now I would like to zoom more on pre-service teacher education and to talk about things that we know, and especially to look at the things that we don't know. There are so many things we don't know that it leaves us puzzled about how and what to do in teacher education. We know that we need to attract good candidates, okay? But what is a valid selection procedure for good candidates? What has predictive value, okay? Potential to say this person might be a good teacher. We know that we need to have teachers who have solid subject matter knowledge. How much is sufficient? If I'm preparing a math teacher, what kind of math education that person needs to have? Is it like a BA at the university? Or it has to be more adjacent to the school curriculum mathematics? We know that student teaching is a central and capstone experience. But what constitutes a rich clinical experience? I think, Sharon, that you are going to talk about it in your final presentation, right? We know that clinical practice in partnerships is very important, but we have difficulties to sustain schools' commitment to partnerships. How to do that? We know that simulated learning and hands-on experience related to coursework is really important, but we all must admit we have difficulties integrating theory into practice. There are a million papers and conferences on integrating theory and practice. Honestly, we not always know how to do that. We know that it's important to have role modeling in teacher education. How to sort out teacher educators? Do we have mechanisms to say this is a good teacher educator? We know some of the main content building blocks in teacher education, the contents. I can talk about 3 basic categories, whether we look at Lee Schulman's category, content knowledge, pedagogical content knowledge, or we go to the traditional system of teaching philosophy of education, sociology of education, psychology of education, etc., etc. Or I even take from what Miriam Ben-Peretz said yesterday from Delors' report, learning to be, learning to know, learning to do, learning to live together. Great ideas. What gets into the content of each of them? It doesn't matter which category you take. What do we teach in each of this category? Okay? We have limited research to create evidence-based teacher education in terms of the contents. We know that emphasis on teaching on how to learn and being a facilitator of learning is great. We say that the teacher is not, delivering the content anymore. But I can tell you that I met 2 weeks ago with a school principal in Kfar Saba, which is a very good, high quality community. And he said to me, most of the students in my high school, would not be able to work in inquiry-based learning or problem-based learning. They need extremely structured classes and lectures by the teacher, and they want everything organized. So when we talk about this facilitator of learning in modes which are not what we say formal frontal instruction, one size fits all. We want to cater to different kids and their needs. And what happens to basic knowledge and skill in such a situation? We know that initial teacher education is part of a lifelong learning sequence, but what is must in pre-service? And how to connect effectively initial teacher education with induction and continuous professional development. And finally, the importance of dispositions, mindset, values, expectation, and the clinical sense, that Professor Halevi will talk about this clinical sense later on as well, is extremely important. But we don't have effective ways to develop this. On the contrary, we have many studies that show that we cannot change students' attitudes and beliefs through teacher education, that they come to the program and get outside the program with similar beliefs, and there are no effective ways to change that. So if we look at the right size of what we don't know in teacher education, it's quite tough to prepare for a profession when so many things are still unknown. The last challenge is the challenge of building a high-performing profession. And we can say, I'll just show 2 ministers of education, Rabbi Shai Piron, who is recently elected Israeli Minister of Education, that just said in the Knesset last month how important teacher education is for him, and it's going to be on the agenda. And Arnie Duncan, the US Secretary of State, who gave an extremely interesting speech at Teachers College 3 years ago, and said that academic teacher preparation programs are the key to improving schooling. So I would like to briefly share with you what needs to be done to build a high-performing profession, lessons from around the world, and I selected 3 different resources out of many that I read and I'm familiar with. Time was just too limited. I want to share with you from the OECD 2011 study, Building a High-Quality Teaching Profession, Lessons from Around the World, then from Linda Darling-Hammond's article from 2011, summary of the first ever International Summit on Teaching, and from the European Trade Union Committee for Education from 2008, Teacher Education in Europe, it's a policy paper. What's common to all these different things that are coming from different places in the world is that all is connected. Don't try to change teacher education unless you change something dramatically in teaching. There is an intertwining relationships between the profession and the preparation for the profession. Interestingly enough, all 3 resources provide us with some kind of a prescription or even a manual of what's successful and what has, already accumulated good results in other countries. So I'll start with the OECD. OECD asked the question how countries have succeeded in making teaching an attractive profession. And they provide the following things. Through pay and by raising the status of teaching, offering real career prospect and giving teachers responsibility as professionals and leaders of reform. These 2 points go together. Focus initial teacher education on helping teachers become innovators and researchers in education and play an active role in the design and running of education rather than just deliverers of the curriculum and followers of standardized practices. Active campaign to seek to draw in groups who might not otherwise have considered teaching. Make candidates feel they are going into a career well paid and sought after by high flyers, appreciated. Creating working environment in schools that is professional and encourages teachers' autonomy and collaboration. Offering longer programs for professional development that upgrade teachers' qualifications and involve collaborative research to improve the teaching effectiveness. And evaluating teachers through multiple measures in fair and transparent ways accepted by the profession. If I can just summarize the major flair of this recommendation is that respect teachers, listen to teachers, and do not come with top-down reforms. Make things in a participatory way. Linda Darling-Hammond. Initial teacher education. All teachers need to be prepared at the master's level degree at high-quality preparation programs. Student teachers need to receive salaries while they prepare, like beginning teachers. They learn research-based strategies and train with experts in model schools. On the job, after they finish at initial teacher education, all graduates enter a well-paid profession that is trusted and appreciated. They are supported by mentor teachers and have at least 15 hours a week to work and learn together. They have ample opportunities for professional development and they are offered a career ladder. There is no ranking of teachers based on their students' achievements. And when there is a teacher evaluation system, it focuses on how well a teacher develops the whole child and contributes to the welfare of the whole school. And in terms of the school conditions, graduates need to work in schools that are equitably funded and have the latest technology and materials. Wishful thinking, right? The European point of view. All teachers are educated at the master's level in high academic standards, research-based programs where there is an effort to integrate theory and practice. The contents of initial teacher education are in-depth subject knowledge, advanced pedagogical skills, reflective practice, ability to adapt teaching to the needs of each individual and group of learners, focus on teachers' autonomy and professional mobility. The mode of initial teacher education has to be rooted in everyday reality of schools through partnerships between teacher education institutions and schools. That's a must. Teacher educators must possess at least a master's degree and have experience of teaching in schools, have good working conditions, such as a good teacher-student ratio, opportunities for collaboration, for research, etc. The role of teacher education institutions is from initial teacher education through induction to continuous professional development. Everything has to be under the umbrella of academic teacher education programs. And the teachers as professionals, as we said in the other reports, respect, pay, influence, continuous professional development, etc. So if we take this international vision and try to see how we can implement some of these things into Israel, I would like to look at 4 clusters very briefly because my time is running up. I want to take this opportunity to say that in the last few years, I think under the leadership of Mrs. Gila Nagar, a lot has been done to improve all these things, but it was done more locally and from a local perspective. I would like to suggest that we can try to apply and implement some of this international perspective as well. So the one cluster is to increase the status and improve the conditions of the teachers' colleges. It includes some structural things, changing the working conditions of teacher educators, which are horrendous in our country. Invest in the academic and physical infrastructures to provide proper teaching and learning environment. Allow for collaboration and research time, and promote the MED as the ultimate professional development of teachers rather than the union's frameworks talking about Ofek Chadash and Oz Latmura. This has to be tremendously changed in the reform that is taking place right now. In terms of the second cluster, which is teaching candidates, focus on postgraduate candidates, promote the master teaching, provide substantial financial support to excellent candidates, provide placement services to graduates. That's crucial. People that finish teacher education need to have access, easy access to open jobs in the market. And strengthen the induction stage. Cooperating schools must be financed adequately in order to mentor student teachers if you want to have these partnerships. And teachers, okay, refrain from punitive evaluation, provide effective continuous professional development, and to build career ladders for teachers. So if I summarize, I come back to the 5 challenges, which I just, went through very, very briefly. I think that serious, comprehensive, and systematic consideration of the 5 challenges, in my opinion, is a necessary and required platform for developing effective teacher policy. Addressing simultaneously these multiple and dynamic challenges is the key to upgrading pre-service education as well as the profession itself. It's doable. It needs courage. It needs persistence and perseverance. It needs high priority investment and budgets. Yes, it needs that. It seems to me that such demanding consideration is quite unique to the teaching profession among the other professions. But in the highlights of what I showed from the international perspective, as I showed, it's doable. So why shouldn't we be able to do it? Anybody who wants to have this presentation can just scan the QR. You get my presentation. Thank you.